Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Wednesday, January 21st. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris, Jed Lowry here with you on this episode. We get caught up on some big news around baseball. The Mets have been a lot more active over the past week or so. We'll talk about the trade for Luis Robert that went down on Tuesday. We'll dig into the signing of Bo Bichette and their plans to play him at third base. We're going to take a deep dive into Geraldo Perdomo later in the show, a switch hitter that's made some adjustments and got to more power than ever last year. We're going to have Jed help us break down what went right and whether or not that is actually sustainable in 2026 and beyond. And we're going to dig into a really interesting piece over at Fangraphs from Davey Andrews. It probably hooked a lot of people listening to this show and watching this show. It's called "They Don't Make Pitch Models Like They Used to." It caught our attention right away, so we'll dig into that over the course of the next hour or so as well. Jed, how's it going for you, man?
I can't complain. Just I'm deep into club volleyball season, so we're starting to travel, and I'm trying to not let my anxiety as a parent get the best of me while watching my kid compete.
Don't yell at them.
She reminds me. She reminds me regularly that I know nothing about volleyball. So
yeah, that's a good point. Might be harder if they were playing baseball.
Yeah, you got winter ball started up already for you too.
No, it's actually time for spring ball. The evaluations on Saturday for my youngest. And they are I'm going to thank Trevor on the show, but Trevor had us out to an event where the Bat Bros were doing a thing with Eric Sim, King of JUCO, out there on the field in San Francisco. And those guys were having so much fun that I think my kids, I don't know, there's something that was like this sort of rediscovery of fun. Like sometimes it can get baseball can get sort of everyday and grindy, and even for kids, I think. And when we were playing catch in the outfield, where the Giants play catch, and they were like, oh my God, the ball bounces perfectly. They were like, this grass is perfect. Like you can actually predict where the ball will land and bounce. You're not like, where is this going to go? And Felix got to throw off the mound, and we've been debating whether or not he's going to play this next season. And he was so happy to throw off the major league mound to me, and he just you could see his heart was just racing. And what he agreed to do with me is a throwing program. So he's not gonna play because I think he gets pretty nervous about hitting. But he loves pitching. And I think he got on that mound and was like, yeah, I love this. So we're going to do a throwing program. And by the time he gets to high school, he can be a pitcher only. So I think the plan is to try and aim for that. So it was a good weekend.
Yeah, it sounded like a cool event when Trevor told us about it. And there's going to be some great content that comes out from there as well. So looking forward to checking that out when it drops on YouTube here in the next few weeks. Let's get into some of the news. The Mets and White Sox hooked up on a trade. Luis Robert heads to New York. He is now the Mets center fielder. This leads me to just a bunch of questions about a player that's been puzzling for most of his big league career. And I don't want to dismiss the importance of injuries as a part of the conversation. I mean, there was a major hip injury, a grade 3 hip flexor tear back in 2021. He hurt the same hip again in 2024. It wasn't quite as bad, but it was a significant injury. Hamstring strains on multiple occasions in 2025. But when he's going right and when he's healthy, Luis Robert looks like a 5-win player. And right now he's on a 1-year deal with a player option, the final year of a deal. So he's a year-to-year sort of player for a team that can easily afford a $20 million center fielder if they get the good version of Luis Robert. But even over the last 2 seasons, we see power, we see speed, but we see an 84 WRC+. It's maddening because there are clear and obvious tools here. Where do you stand on Luis Robert? How good is he right now? What did the Mets do to bolster their lineup and their outfield defense with this trade?
I think the depth charts in New York were so threadbare in the outfield. We were making a joke on the Discord that Tyrone Taylor was the starter in 2 of the 3 positions on the depth chart, which is impossible. So they had, I think, 3 outfielders on the 40-man. One was Juan Soto, one was Carson Benji. Maybe they had 4 because Tyrone Taylor, maybe he's not even on. I don't know. There was 3 or 4 outfielders total on the depth chart. So and what they gave up, Luis Angel Acuna to me is a utility guy. It's a speed forward without much contact or power. And so I think he can be a good utility guy. I don't know if he'll be a starter. He'll get a chance to be a starter in Chicago, but he's kind of a throwback player in that he's missing that power aspect of his game. And I think the other pitcher, is a wild card, but I don't think that they paid as much. For example, the trade was supposed to be Mark Vientos for Luis Robert. That was the trade deadline rumor. And I think, it was smart to hang on to Vientos because he's shown good bat speed in the past. He's shown the ability to hit the ball really hard. I know he doesn't really have the defensive component, but they needed cheap players like Vientos that can hit the ball hard. So I think that this was a depth chart play. Worst case scenario, he's a 1.5 to 2 win player that does it by hitting the occasional homer and playing good center field defense and being a non-zero on the base pass. And then there's the upside that he regains some of what he was, in 2022 and 2023. He was a very exciting player. He was 10 to 30% above league average of the bat, even with the same flaws he has now. Yes, he chased then and he struck out a lot then. And he didn't walk then, didn't have a great plate approach then, but he hit 38 homers and stole 20 bases. And if you just look at things like sprint speed and arm strength and bat speed, the athleticism seems to still be there.
What's your overall assessment of Robert at this point in his career, Jed? Because, highlighted 22 and 23, and those were the 2 years he was healthiest out of the last 5.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, here's a guy who's still, 28 years old, but to your point, your good point, he has a pretty big history of significant injury. So, you got to really consider that. But I think it's a low risk move by the Mets. To your point, you got 1 year with an option. If he performs, it's totally worth it to pick up the option. If not, then they're probably I'm assuming there's a buyout in that. They take the buyout and they move on. But I think they could get a very motivated, highly athletic player that has the ability to perform. And I look at the situation in New York versus Chicago. He's going to be on a team that's going to have high expectations to win. He's going to be surrounded by players who are the hunters, not the hunted. And I think that, like I said, they might get they might not get, peak Luis Robert, but I'm guessing they're going to get a highly motivated Luis Robert.
Yeah, I think being stuck in a rebuild and being maybe the only holdover from a previously competitive core with the White Sox was probably suboptimal, layered on top of the health issues he's dealt with for each of the last 2 seasons. So I'm definitely intrigued. They're not going to miss Acuna. I'm probably a little higher on Acuna, at least offering some pop over time, 12, 15 homers, but utility role or super sub that plays 3 positions might be kind of his ideal long-term fit in the big leagues. They also got Truman Pauly back. He was the 12th round pick the Mets had out of Harvard in 2025, only made 3 appearances at single A. So we'll see if Pauly turns into a pitcher that gets out of the radar in the next couple of years. But the Mets have been really busy. They added Bo Bichette since we last had a news-focused pod. 3 years, $126 million, opt-outs after each season, and a plan to play him at third base, a spot he has never played before. Jed, how much of an ask is this for Bo Bichette to really learn on the fly? Obviously has the benefit of spring training and some time before that to begin preparing to play third base. But for a team that has made it clear that upgrading defensively is a priority, and they've done that, the trade for Marcus Semien, the trade for Luis Robert, especially getting better up the middle, that does it. Their infield corners, with Bichette at third, Jorge Polanco now in the mix as one of the regular options at first, have 2 pretty big question marks defensively.
Yeah, I think I love Bichette. I love the bat. It is going to be it's going to be an adjustment. The angles of the balls come off different. He is used to playing the left side of the field, which will help. But it's more of the first step. Shortstop, shortstop is you're ranging a little bit more. The first step, matters a lot, but third base, it's all that matters. It's a pure reaction
the ball's
position.
Coming in really fast, yeah.
Yeah, and you have to read the ball off the bat and react like natural. Like it has to be second nature, and so there is going to be a learning curve. I mean, you look at other players who have made that transition from short to third. It's not always smooth because that reaction time is just it's different, and so I think that I think he has all of the skill set to play third. It's not going to be natural right from Jump Street.
He has a stronger arm than Brett Beatty. I don't have the running right in front of me. In terms of sprint speed, Bichette is 21st percentile, so he's not very fast. But you're right. Sprint speed is not really the metric I want to turn to here because you're talking about reaction time and first step rather than top speed. So, the one thing I do want to point out is that while Bo Bichette was like the worst regular shortstop last year by outs above average, in 2024, he had a 1 OAA who's positive. And so I think maybe to some extent, the team says, hey, he wasn't as bad as he was last year at shortstop, and most shortstops would make better third baseman and second baseman. And so there's a natural sort of move down the chain here, move down the positional chain here. So there are some stats that might be available to teams that we don't have in terms of transfer, maybe first step, like that Jed's talking about, that they've looked at. And then I think to some extent it was, where can we fit a bat in? Where can we fit a special bat into this lineup? Where can we add a special bat? And, the options came off the board. They were a contender for Kyle Tucker. There's reports out that they thought that they had him at one point. And so once Kyle Tucker is gone and Alex Bregman gone, Bo Bichette was the only sort of 3-win type impact bat you could add in. And they did it on a short-term deal. And, I think I've had some conversations with people who were talking about like the average annual value of the deal and how it's too high and this and that. And, average annual value is only as useful as number of years. I think teams will pay even higher than whatever the dollars per win number is I think they did with Kyle Tucker, for example, because the Dodgers had to pay a penalty on top of it. They're not only paying that salary, they're paying a penalty on top of it, but they're paying for financial flexibility. They're paying for the ability to not pay him in years 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there are equivalencies here where it's like, yeah, it sounds like they're paying Bo Bichette, $45 million for a year or whatever. Yes, they are, but they're not. You can't compare that to another player who's on like Manny Machado, who's like on a 10
Bryce
year,
Harper.
30. Yeah. They're on 10-year, 12-year, 13-year deals. It's just
right.
They're not that equivalent. So I think this is a good mix for them. One thing that I see from Stearns is he's not afraid of guys who chase. Bo Bichette and Luis Robert both chase a lot. Maybe he's not afraid of guys who chase if he's not paying them for a long-term deal, right? He's like,
bingo,
not afraid of guy chases for this year and next year. And as long as I'm not stuck at, holding the bag at the end of the career. So, and then the other thing is, he just doesn't like long-term deals. I mean, other than Soto, he traded away, it seems like he traded away Nimmo to get out of that deal, out of a couple years of that deal for Semien. The pieces, maybe he values infield defense more than outfield defense, although Robert can play some defense. I don't know. There's something there about defense where they said, he said at one point that other executives told him his defense was terrible and that was one of the reasons why the Mets weren't any good last year. But Nimmo's defense in the corner outfield versus Semien's at second, given their ages, is it that much of an improvement? And then taking Bichette, who was like one of the worst shortstops, and putting him at third. Like, how much better defensively do we think the Mets are now than they were last year? A little bit.
I mean, and I want to go back to your point too of the roster and like taking guys that he's not afraid to chase. You also look at the rest of the roster composition with guys like Marcus Semien and Juan Soto who command the zone very well. Like I think it's nice to have a balance of both because if you're just facing the same guy as a pitcher from an approach perspective, then you're kind of on cruise control. Like if you go from Juan Soto to Luis Robert, like it's a very different player and a very different plan, right?
Yeah.
And so like Juan Soto's professional approach and he's going to fight stuff off and have long at bats and still going to do a ton of damage, right? Which is why he got the money that he did because he's an all around player. Marcus, same way, is going to be a grinder, foul pitches off, not miss a ton. But then you're sandwich that with Luis Robert, and all of a sudden you make one mistake, and this guy's going to, he's going to take you out.
Yeah, we've talked about it in broader terms as like diversification of hitter types across the lineup.
Right.
You have you have different swing types, you have different approaches, high power swing and miss guys, but then you've got contact guys that'll hit anything in and around the zone. I think that would present some of the more difficult challenges for opposing pitching staffs to match up with. And I've wondered if we could think about that more in the context of Robert Orr's Seager metric from a team perspective. Can you create a team that's just harder to pitch to because they make collectively really good decisions and do it with different actual swing types too? Like that might be optimal. That might be more important to a lot of teams right now than we realize. But there's opt-outs after each year of this deal, which from a roster construction perspective, if you're in a front office and you're going to go higher AAV, but you're going to offer that, it's sort of just a built-in incentive. You're happy. Like in some ways, if Bo Bichette is so good that he can exercise the opt-out after year 1 or year 2, then you were right to go 40 plus million for him because he played really well for you over that season. And for the Mets, this is a team that has World Series aspirations. They still have a WAR projection inside the top 5. I know there's a gap from the Dodgers to everybody else right now, but they're doing the things they need to do to stay right there in that mix. You're starting to see the plan come together. It still doesn't feel like it's complete, though. I still think there's another move or two to come. Maybe it's not big free agent additions at this point, but maybe it's still another trade or something else that either bolsters the rotation or possibly helps give them a little more depth in the outfield because they may not see Carson Benji as big league ready just yet. They may want another veteran in that mix that can afford them a little more time before they start bringing up some of their young position players.
Since Benji hasn't even played in the major leagues, I think that it makes sense to say, he will get playing time in the major leagues this year when, Lou Bob is hurt, right? Like we're going to need him this year. He's going to be in there at some point. He's going to get his feet wet. And it doesn't make much sense to me to, say, well, now he's our left fielder with Tyrone Taylor and Brett Beatty. Like there's something there that doesn't make sense to me. So I think changing the left field strategy, unless they just think that Brett Beatty can be a left fielder. The Fangraphs has it like Benji 50%, Tyrone Taylor 30%, Brett Beatty 20%. I think it's almost just all backwards. I think it's Brett Beatty most likely to be the left fielder right now as things stand, unless maybe they trade him or they trade Vientos and they trade into a left fielder. And then you have decent defenders. You could potentially have decent defenders in left, center, short, second, and then wild cards at third and at first. I mean, Blanco's never played first base. I mean, there are some wild cards here, but at least you'd be decent up the middle. Francisco Alvarez, Francisco Lindor, Marcus Semien, Luis Robert are going to be good up the middle defensively.
It's the Billy Beane approach. Just put somebody who can hit, put a first baseman glove on them, and they'll figure it out.
Yeah, they got a couple options, and Kai Correa is there as the bench coach, and we'll see what that coaching staff can do, trying to find the right fits at those corner spots. But very curious to see how the defensive side of this ends up working out with Bo over at third base. We want to hear from you. We're asking you to fill out a quick survey about you and your podcast habits by going to theathletic.com/survey26. 3 lucky entries will win $100 worth of Amazon vouchers. So whether you're a longtime listener to the show or a new one, we want your feedback. Go to theathletic.com/survey26. That's theathletic.com/survey26. You'll also find that link in the show description. All right, let's move on. More Mets stuff, at least Mets adjacent stuff. Carlos Beltran and Andruw Jones are headed to the Hall of Fame. You know, we talked about your ballot, I think maybe in December before it was due. And if I remember correctly, I'm not sure that I do, you had both Beltran and Jones on your ballot?
I did. I have voted for them since I was able to. And, I grew up in Atlanta, so I don't know if I'm, there's a little tinge of fandom in there, but I saw Andruw Jones be the youngest. He still is the youngest player to ever hit a home run in the World Series. I saw him track down all those balls. I did, there is this funny part of fandom too, where the denouement, the end of his career was not great because he had that high chase rate and he really couldn't lay off the slider blown away. And that's when you saw the batting average go down, the strikeout rate go up, but he still hit a bunch of homers and was still a good defender into the end of his career. I did struggle with how his career ended and the domestic violence incident that he had. But I had someone tell me that that's why his career ended. I disagree. I look at the numbers and I think that is meaningful because if his career ended, like if it was such a bad incident that his career ended because of it, then maybe I should put more weight on that. But I think his career also just ended because it was time. Like, if you look at the last couple of years of his career, I don't think, even without an incident, I'm not sure someone's signing him. So I don't know if this is mental gymnastics or whatever. I in the end, he wasn't suspended for it. And, this was, I think he was a Hall of Famer. It's a defense forward package, but it's a defense forward package with a ton of home runs. It's not, it's not someone that was a zero at the plate. Andruw Jones, for his career, hit 434 homers, was 11% better than league average with the bat, and then just happened to be one of the best center fielders of all time defensively.
Yeah, just happened to be. From a strictly WAR percentage, both of these guys are no doubters, right? You got Andruw Jones, it's almost 63 WAR, and Beltran 70 on the nose. So, and you look at some of the heroics of Beltran, specifically that postseason with the Astros, where it seemingly hit like 30 home runs in the postseason. It's like every at bat he had. I'm happy to see both of these guys in because they're deserving of it. Both have had their off-field controversies, but on the field, these guys they're Hall of Famers.
Just to be clear, that's the 2004 Astros you're talking about. Where he hit 435 in the postseason with 8 homers. He was a great. I just want to point out which Astros it was because he is tinged by the cheater label with the he was back coach with the Astros. Later.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah, he was still playing, wasn't he?
He was still playing.
That's right.
The year that they cheated, he hit 150 with 0 homers in the postseason. So that's a whole weird thing, but. For his, you have the 67 wins above replacement for Beltran on Fangraphs just in the regular season, but he had a whole another almost 300 plate appearances, 16 homers, hit 307, was 69% better than league average in the postseason for his career. So, that's a little spice on top. Yeah, again, I wish that both these guys didn't have like a little bit of an asterisk associated with them. But I would just say that like for Beltran, if he cheated, it did not change his career. Like he didn't cheat like that everywhere. That was a very sort of Astro specific thing. And it was at the end of his career. And I don't think it added a lot. If you want to take 2-3 wins off of the top, like, he was still an excellent player. And for what it's worth, another guy that I watched as a fan and thought this is a Hall of Famer because he does everything really, really well. And I know he doesn't have some of the hardware of some of these of the other Hall of Famers in terms of personal hardware, MVPs and stuff. But I think that part of that was just he had the kind of game that, was WAR friendly, wins above replacement friendly, but not necessarily the type that would win you an MVP he never really had great batting averages, and you know what I mean? I don't think he appealed to voters the right way. And there were times where, I think there should have been more hardware going his way.
Yeah, I mean, he is a career 279 hitter, so it's not as if he didn't hit for average. I mean, 270. I think every GM would take a 279 hitter,
especially now. But
that hits that for a 162 game average has 27 homers and 99 RBIs. So that's a Hall of Fame type production, especially now. And to your point of taking a couple wins off the top in 2017, he did that himself. He was a negative WAR player in 2017. So I mean, that. So whatever was happening, clearly didn't help him in any statistical way.
He could have also won the NL MVP the year that Ryan Howard won it. He had 3 more wins than Ryan Howard, but Ryan Howard had 58 homers and 149 RBI. So he didn't get any first place votes, and he should at least have gone up against Pujols that year. So. And also, can you elect people to the Hall of Fame that never won MVP? I think, yeah. They can be. What if they're just 3? Yeah. What if they're the 3rd or 4th best guy for 10 years? That's sort of where Beltrán was. So.
Yeah, and to your point about the off-field stuff too, and the asterisks, and I think you said it, and I've expressed this before. It's the suspension. You start peeling back layers of previous generations on what isn't what was allowed or what was overlooked in previous generations. I think the line is suspension.
There's some bad dudes in the Hall of Fame right now, dude. That's according to our standards right now.
That's the tough part is you can't undo what's already in there. But at the same time, I don't have a vote. I probably never will. I don't think I would have voted for Andruw Jones. The details of the domestic violence incident are there. They're still out there. They're linked in a lot of the stories about it. I just would have left him off my ballot. I know he's a great center fielder, a great ball player, but I just, something doesn't sit right with me about that. To know that and to vote him in anyway. I know we can't fix past mistakes, but we can decide on what's in front of us now to do better, right? And I think doing better was just not giving him a vote. That's how I would have played it. Yeah. I understand how people get there. There's logical paths to it. Jason Stark wrote about this too, just in terms of how the percentage of votes that each of these guys got changed over time with different groups. Jason Sardell does a lot of research on Hall of Fame balloting, and it's interesting to track it. All the different ways that, Beltrán had a gradual increase in support over time from writers who had previously voted for Bonds and Clemens. He went from 66% for people that voted for both Bonds and Clemens in 2023, all the way up to 93% support for people that voted for Bonds and Clemens this year. And then he also quadrupled his vote from what they called the keep the cheaters out voters, the writers who weren't voting for either Bonds or Clemens in their final year. He went from 13% back in 2023 all the way up to 50% from those voters. So I just think those trends are sort of interesting because they give us an idea of what matters to the people that do have ballots. I appreciate when people either, in Nino's case, say exactly why they did or didn't vote for someone, whether people write about it. I think that's what I think is owed to everyone else. If you have that vote, break it down, explain yourself, and at least put the reasons out there. But Jones went from 7.3% support back in 2018, got to 78.4% this year. It just made me start thinking about the lower percentage players right now that have the best chance to eventually get in. And for me, the guy that sort of stood out, and maybe this is because I read a breakdown from Dan Szymborski of his ballot that included David Wright. I think David Wright makes a lot of sense to me as someone that will eventually get into Cooperstown because the peak was phenomenal. Careers are getting shorter, right? The wear and tear on players' body is just different now than it used to be. And I think as a result, this recent cohort of retired players and soon to retire players who are not going to have traditional Hall of Fame milestones on their Baseball Reference and Fangraphs pages, they're going to get in. And I think as the electorate changes also, the expectations are going to be different. And I think compared to a lot of other guys that were, under 25% this year, that'd be Cole Hamels in his first time on the ballot was under 25%. Dustin Pedroia, Mark Burley, Omar Vizquel still down there. He's not getting in for me. Like he's on his ninth time. He's not getting in. Wright's down there. K-Rod's down there. Torrey Hunter's down there. I'm the one. I look at David Wright and I'm like, man, that guy was really, really good for a nice peak before injuries kind of took away the back half of his career.
Yeah, I think we talked about David. I think when we were discussing like the Dale Murphys, and I think we were looking at Dale Murphy, who's deserving as well. But you start looking at Dale Murphy and you compare him to a David Wright and a Dustin Pedroia. There are some clear, I think you're right. The expectations in terms of bulk numbers are going to decrease. And I just want to make something clear too, just to take this back, DVR, because you mentioned about the domestic violence stuff. The game is in a much better place and enforcing these incidents much better. And so I don't want to sit here and condone, the actions that took place on that, on that event. And I think we're in a much better place with the game because I think that, domestic violence is something that, we need to, is unacceptable and should be eradicated just in general. So I just want to make sure I make myself clear on that. And so, but going back to the David Wrights of the world, I agree. I said it before and I'll say it again. I think both Dustin Pedroia and David Wright are Hall of Famers. They are the best of their generation.
The hardest votes for me were Andruw Jones. Andy Pettitte is a tough one for me. There is no suspension, but there is some knowledge of what he'd done in terms of HGH and even an admission. And then the other two were Pedroia and Wright. I ended up not voting for Pedroia and Wright just because I felt it came a little short. There was also a little bit of signaling from the Veterans Committee when they didn't vote, for Murphy and Mattingly to, there was, players themselves thought maybe the careers were too short or the peaks were too short. So I don't know, I think it is weird. I try to think, I've made my decision on this. I'm not gonna change. How do these votes change over time? Like how does someone become a Hall of Famer over time? And I think part of it is, yes, we look at how the game is changing right now in front of us. And so when we have people ending their careers after great peaks in front of us and we think, oh, I think that guy's a Hall of Famer, man, maybe Wright and Pedroia were Hall. You know what I mean? Like we rethink past things. I think this is particularly true. I voted for Felix Hernandez and Cole Hamels. In terms of just straight up wins above replacement, they are not top half Hall of Famers. They're sort of median Hall of Famers among starting pitchers. However, if you look at their peers and you look at, a lower volume starting pitcher peer cohort that they live in, they're top 10 pitchers, and, so that's why I voted for those guys. And maybe when I sort of do some more introspection, I think, well, if I voted for Felix and Cole among their peers with lower totals, lower volume totals, maybe I need to do the same for hitters. So I could see myself maybe changing my vote for Wright and Pedroia on the first one. Another one that I could see myself maybe changing my vote for, I didn't vote for Burley, but if you actually compare Burley to Felix and Hamels, it's really similar. I mean, in terms of ERA plus, because you have to adjust for his stadium that he pitched in terms of WAR, in terms of a lot of these things. The reason I didn't vote for Burley was he came up short in strikeouts. I mean, he was a very low strikeout pitcher, but he got the job done. I know, Zach Greinke's always thought that Burley was an excellent all around player defensively, and that he was a Hall of Famer. So. Burley's a guy I might change my vote on. Pedroia and Wright I might change my vote on. There is some, for those that are, sort of thinking about who will make it in and the odds of the future and like who's on the way for sure. Jay Jaffe had this table that was pretty eye-opening for me, and this is the highest share of like the highest share they ever got in a vote, and they weren't ever elected. And so at the top you have Schilling, Bonds, and Clemens and Sheffield, who have pretty big asterisks themselves. Then you have Chase Utley, who's still on the ballot, so he's pretty much guaranteed to be in. Everyone else, he doesn't have any of the whiffs that these other guys do. There's no sort of morals clause issue here. So Chase Utley is on his way in. Omar Vizquel peaked at 52.6, but you can see he's going the wrong way. So there's a trend there that's in the other direction. Plus he had his own issues. Roger Maris, peaked at 43. Then you have some more guys below him that peaked in the 40s. So basically, you have this 43% line where if you don't have a huge morals clause thing hanging over your head, you're in. The guys that cleared the 43% line and don't have anything morals over their head is Felix Hernandez and Chase Utley. And then Andy Pettit's just a big question mark. Do you lump him in with, if you're in the anti-cheater crowd, where do you put him? Can he get more of those votes like Beltrán did? Can he get 30-40% of the anti-cheater crowd votes and everybody else's vote and get in that way? I do think it might be one of those ones where he gets elected at 75.3 or whatever, but I kind of think he's on his way. So if you're wondering who will make the Hall of Fame next year, it's most likely to be Felix Hernandez and Chase Utley.
Yeah, it's going to take a little more time, I think, for David Wright and Pedroia to maybe make those incremental leaps. Part of it, too, I think we were at a point a few years ago, the ballot was a little bit more crowded with what many people believed were surefire Hall of Famers. That log
This is the first time I didn't vote for 10.
Yeah,
well,
so now
I was going to ask
you,
how much like the actual mechanics, of the like voting process. You were talking about how do you go from a guy that's not a Hall of Famer to a Hall of Famer? Like, I think a lot of that is mechanics, right? Is like who's on the ballot and how many votes you get.
And how, you're right. Sometimes there were times where I wanted to vote for 12 and there was 10 and I had to do strategic voting, or where I voted for a guy to keep him on the ballot, that sort of stuff. And then I think also like there is an element of, like, I think you're alluding to this, that like, who's on the ballot, like what are you looking at? And so if, the other players don't look that great, they'll look better. And I think there is, I don't know if voters care about this. The Hall of Fame wants someone to be elected every year, I think, because they want to have a Hall of Fame, their whole spiel that they do. So, they wouldn't mind if David Wright and Dustin Pedroia squeak on some year where there just really isn't like an obvious Hall of Famer otherwise.
Yeah, probably better for business to have people getting in every year than to have a year where there's just a bunch of empty chairs on the stage, right? Like, it's not really what you want.
You put some pressure on the Veterans Committee. Come on, put somebody in, dude.
Well, yeah, you got 3 up there now, right? Because you got Jeff Kent with the 2 players that were voted in by the BBWA.
Congrats to them all. I mean, there's some negativity associated with this vote, but it's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome to be up there.
The Hall is particularly stingy or limited with center fielders, as we know, too. So some change on that front. And
it's a stingier Hall than other sports, man. I mean, you want to look at some Hall of Fames. Like, there are some surprising names in the basketball and football Hall of Fames. I've been like, well, really? Okay.
More to come, I'm sure. This is an annual topic that comes up a couple different times as these various committees gather and as we have the annual BBWAA voting results. Let's go from the past and start looking toward the future again. And this is interesting. I think Davey Andrews from Fangraphs had a story called "They Don't Make Pitch Models Like They Used to." There was a related one from Ben Clemens focusing on barrels, and a lot of it kind of focuses on the concept of Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a good measure. And one of the areas that was focused on in Davey's story was that pitch framing at one point in time was something that a lot of teams didn't care about. So you had this wide range of pitch framers. You had Ryan Dumit behind the plate, for example. Sorry, Ryan. And then you had teams that cared about pitch framing that were getting a pretty big advantage because the spread. Yeah, the spread of pitch framers in the game at that time was very wide. And then when it was realized that pitch framing was important, Ryan Dumits were no longer catching, and things sort of converged, and that relative advantage shrunk, right? A great framer is still better than a good one, but everyone's framing, everyone's trying to get that. The competitive edge really kind of gets blunted over time. So this focused on pitch models, and as soon as that came out, everyone's like, what's happening here? They don't make pitch models like they used to. What's wrong with Stuff Plus? And it wasn't about that. It wasn't criticizing the models. It was just highlighting that as pitchers train differently and as hitters adjust to the way pitchers have been training, the results don't stay at the same elevated level they were back at the beginning.
Yeah, there's a couple math things here that I just wanted to point out that, the way that Tom Tango has a little bit on this on Bluesky, but the way that populations work, that if you take the bottom and the top, if you make the spread smaller, and so you have, you don't have as many really bad stuff pitchers anymore because, now that we measure that, teams are like, I'm not going to sign this 60 Stuff Plus guy, like it's a little bit like I'm not going to sign Ryan Domit to be my catcher because I can measure framing and it's too bad, So once you take that bottom out, and the top kind of that comes down a little bit too, because everyone's sort of training the same way, and they're this is why the law exists. Everyone's sort of training towards that. Everyone's making it a target, and so they're everyone knows what good stuff is now, and so they're all trying to all have good stuff. So like the spread changes, and that changes the year-to-year correlation. That's something that they were looking at, was the year-to-year correlation is going down. And so that'll happen just because the spread changes. It's a mathematical fact. Another mathematical fact that is involved in this is Stuff Plus is a little bit like xWOBA. And what I'm saying about that is, xWOBA changes every year when they look around and they say, okay, this is what the environment, this is what the ball is doing this year. And so this is what in every All-Star break, they retrain xWOBA, and xWOBA can now say better, this launch angle and this exit velocity creates this outcome because now we know how the ball is playing and how the league is playing and this and that, right? So Stuff Plus changes. We take training out, we retrain it. And so this year, for example, we're going to take 2020 and 2021 out of the training of this model. And what it'll do, it'll get better. So anytime you would look at the year-to-year correlations or like the predictive quality of Stuff Plus, the last year that in your sample will be the worst because we haven't retrained. We haven't caught up yet. That'll be the worst. So, if he was making a point of, look, the graph goes down. Well, it'll always go down in the last year because you haven't retrained it yet. So we're about to retrain it. I would love for him to rerun the numbers. I think just because of how math works, it'll look better because we retrained it and it's more tight to what last year is predicting it, So, that'll be part of it. And the way that I explain it is sweepers. Sweepers in 2020 were basically a novel pitch, or at least, knowing what the science was and knowing how to create sweepers and knowing that they did really well. That was kind of a new thing in 2020 because we had Hawkeye and because we had a better sense of a seam shifted wake and all this. And then it got popularized. I'm writing about it. Lindsay Adler's writing about it, where, it becomes a thing. And people are like, I'm adding sweeper. They have entire organizations. The Mariners and the Yankees are just like, hey, everyone add a sweeper, And then hitters are like, okay, I got it. What was this at first? And then they're like, okay, that's a sideways thing. It doesn't go down, like I have to actually aim higher, than I think. It's not going to go down as much. And, that's going to go really sideways. I'm going to take this pitch. That looks like it's a strike, but it's going to be way out. It's 17 inches of movement. And they start speaking the parlance of sweepers. They get better at it. And so if you look at the numbers, batters have gotten better at sweepers every year. So a model that includes 2020 is still going to be picking up, sweepers are great. So someone's asking, Luis Severino, his Stuff Plus is great. Well, it's floated by a great sweeper Stuff Plus number. What happens when we take 2020 and 2021 out retrain the model starts picking up, oh, sweepers have not as good outcomes as they used to, and then it's going to tighten. I can almost guarantee that Luis Severino's Stuff Plus number is going to go down once we update it. And that'll make the correlations tighter and the predicted quality tighter. So it's a moving target, and I know that upsets some people because it's not like, I don't know, like a home run total that just, he hit 35 homers that year. We're not changing it. I get
something that we talked about too that you said is as you get more bolt performance, it becomes less relevant.
Yep.
Because you actually know, okay, so like this Stuff Plus or this, the predictive statistics, as you get more bulk numbers, that correlation kind of breaks a little bit. That's my understanding from what you were saying about it, which makes total sense to me, because at the end of the day, it's being able to perform.
Yeah. So like bat speed tells you almost as much as barrel rate in 3 swings. Right. You could get almost as much information as barrel rate in 3 swings. Guess what's better though? Barrel rate. And guess what's really better if you're talking about like 5 years of a career? And it starts to actually be slugging percentage. But like we're so like, we're starting to be like, oh, we want to know quickly. Well, it's great to know something after 3 swings. That's amazing to know anything after 3 swings. And Stuff Plus is the same way. It's like that guy had 1 start and, maybe the start was bad. Oh, he must be bad. No, let's look at the Stuff Plus. We know something more. 5 starts. Let's look at strikeouts minus walks. 10 starts. All right, now let's start to look at some other results, So like, that's a part of it. But I think the last part that is frustrating and interesting and sounds like a buzzword, but I think the growth mindset is important. And it's part of why anytime a new stat comes out, I lean in, I try to learn as much as I can about it, try to learn what's predictive, try to use that in my analysis here, even if it makes Terry's eyes roll sometimes, is because like that is the edge. That's the newest stat that we have. That is the current edge. And then B, like a growth mindset says, okay, we learned what we could from Stuff Plus. It is now part of our lexicon. We've thrown it into our toolbox. We put it into projections. We've learned from it. What's next? What's next? We have to take what we can that we know now, and we have to keep moving. We just have to keep learning about the game, because whatever you know for sure becomes stale after a while.
Yeah, and like what just like when you're playing, I've talked a lot about intent, right? Is like, what's the intent of these statistics? I think that's important to understand too, and like what they're actually revealing. Because I think if you look at one thing and say this is the end all be all, it's just that's not that. We're never going to be able to find that, because there are other issues that are involved that are human related that we will never be able to quantify. And so Stuff Plus and, some of these other predictive stats, they might say this is what the ceiling is for this guy, but then you still got to go out and produce to that ceiling day in and day out.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Even for somebody who just wants to use Stuff Plus for fantasy, I think as a ceiling, it's a great ceiling number. Now, not everyone gets there. Like Graham Ashcraft has had great Stuff Plus numbers. Why didn't he get to his ceiling? I'm not impugning his makeup. I'm saying, well, it ended up being 2 pitches. It's not great command of both pitches. Neither pitch was so outstanding that he could just Mariano Rivera it, And, we still haven't written the end of his career as a reliever. Like he may end up being a great reliever in the end. So
and good pitches in the big leagues get hit if they're mistakes.
Yeah.
Good pitches in the minor leagues don't always get hit.
Yeah, right.
Right? You can make mistakes with good pitch dynamics in the minor leagues and get away with it. Good pitches with good dynamics in the big leagues that are mistakes get hit.
Yeah.
I think that also explains some of the guys that we see on the pitching side that come through the minor leagues. This is an Andrew Abbott thread once again. 30% K rates throughout all his time in the minor leagues. And we see that as numbers people were like, he's going to strike out a lot of guys in the big leagues. He gets to the big leagues and he strikes out 22% of the batters he's faced through parts of 3 seasons now. I think we've seen Andrew Abbott. And there's something that's different about him as far as the results he gets compared to his stuff numbers. And we've called these guys Lodem players. It's model spelled backwards, incorrectly. The idea came from a few years ago. I said I want players that the projections and the models and the scouting reports don't like. I was a little bit joking, but the half serious part was just leaving my mind open to the possibility that we just don't know everything, and sometimes there's something happening that actually is more repeatable than we think. There's clearly something there. Whether it's this level that he just put up in 2025 or not, I think is absolutely worth debating. But you keep beating your indicators for a reason. We talked about Geraldo Perdomo during the shortstop position preview last week, and it's easy. I think this is a good example, though, of a player that if you're a traditional fantasy analyst, which is the very broad bucket I'd put myself in, like that's the lens through which I try to view the game, kind of numbers first, fantasy forward, but then obviously there are real life aspects of the game that I've tried to understand, learn, break down, and add to the analysis over time. The snap reaction for someone with my background is to look at what Perdomo did in 2025 and go, well, that's fluky. There's nowhere to go but down. I've learned my lesson after 20-ish years that it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you have late bloomers, you have guys that make significant adjustments. And Jose Bautista was probably the first player that came along that just completely shattered my expectation based on previous results, hit this new level. I think it cost me a burrito too. I lost the burrito bet on the encore, the follow-up on Bautista. Just smashed the number of homers I thought he was going to hit the next year by an embarrassing number. So I've learned gradually over time, like sometimes the late breakout is real. And I'm starting to think that with Perdomo, there's a little more going on, in part because he switch hits. And fortunately, we have someone here who played in the big leagues as a switch hitter. Yeah. And Jed, like when you look at Perdomo over time, what really changed for him at the plate last year compared to what we have in the last 2 seasons of his career?
Yeah. I still I can't, I don't know if I'll ever get over this, but like calling a 26-year-old a late bloomer, it just doesn't compute. Like my mind starts to melt a little bit when I hear that, but I understand, I understand, from a predictive model, and, Eno knows everything about a hitter after 3 swings. So I can understand why some might think that 26 is a late bloomer. But I do think, we talk a lot about, tilt in the swing, and I started looking at, swing path. I think his swing path is within a band. He did add a little bit of bat speed to the equation in 25. But when I look at the major adjustment, I'm looking at the stance. And I really dove in and, looked at 23 to 25 for Perdomo and tried to understand if there was some sort of adjustment. And we talked about this with, Caglione a while back, and, how his center of mass was really too far forward for my liking. And you look at the adjustment that Perdomo made from 23 to 25, particularly right-handed, where you look at the jump in production. He is about 2 inches wider from 23 to 25, but he's 10 inches more open. He's roughly 2.5 inches closer to the plate. But the big thing that I looked at is his center of mass is 7 inches further back than it was 23 to 25. And left-handed, there was a big adjustment, but not quite as big. 3.5 inches center mass further back. Virtually the same, or actually the exact same distance off the plate, a little wider and a little bit more open. But I look at that center of mass where he is on having that 60-40 stance. I look at the high velocity in the game, the high spin with great depth on breaking balls. And if you are out on that front foot with that type of velocity and vertical depth, it makes it really hard to drive the baseball. Because you've kind of committed your weight going forward. And at that point, once it's committed forward towards the pitcher, you don't really have a whole lot left. I think, having the weight distribution further back allows him to be more efficient. And I would argue that his uptick in bat speed has as much to do with efficiency than it does strength gain.
Yeah, I think, your focus on intent matters here too. You had the hunter hunted, analogy you made. I mean, in 2023, Perdomo, got the ball 22 inches out in front. The average is 30. So he's behind the ball 8 inches. He's letting the ball travel 8 inches more than anybody else. He slugs 200 from that side and doesn't do anything. In 2024, he goes and gets the ball a little bit more, 24.8 inches. And he slugs 427 from that side. And then in 2025, 28 inches, closer to 30, which is league average. Ideal for batting average is sort of 32, and ideal for homers is 36, 34, 36. So he's getting closer. He's also, when that moves out, that means there are some that he's getting out that far. Like there's a band around your average intercept point. So I think he just became a little bit more of the hunter rather than the hunted. Another way of saying it is that his fast swing rate went from 2% to 8% from the right side. So, even according to his max swing bat speed, like he was reaching his max bat speed more often. He was taking his A swing more often. One thing that is weird for me though is, and I know that like as a switch hitter, you kind of do this from both sides, but like his intercept point from the left side was 24 last year. So he's still letting the ball travel. And in terms of moving, back in the box, he didn't do that as a left-hander. So what happens more likely this year, Jed? Does he move back in the box as a left-hander and swing fast as a left-hander and stave off some of that natural aggression from the right side with, by doing what he did that worked from the right side on the left side, or are the swings so different from each side that he's going to treat them as unique beasts and not really, because he basically did something from the right side that he could do from the left side, but he chose not to.
Yeah, well, I mean, so to be clear, it's not that he moved really far back in the box, right? Like it's more of the weight distribution, the center of mass, because his back foot, in from the left side in 2023 was at 35 inches. And it went back a couple inches in 25 to 38, but that's, that is, to me, like, that's not a huge gain, like a huge difference in terms of like you're moving back slightly, but the big gain to me was, or the big shift was, especially right-handed, was how much more open he was, not necessarily where his back foot was anchored in the box, but openness and then center of mass. The center of mass to me is what really moved back. Because
I'm saying like, we could look at it left and right, and like, the center of mass on the left is 15 inches closer to the pitcher than it is, if not 15, 5 inches, 6 inches closer to the pitcher than it is from the right. So he but he also had success from the left. So is it just don't mess with something that's working? Yeah,
I think there's I think there's part of that. I think that has, he's always been a pretty effective hitter left-handed. Especially if you compare 23 of OPS lefty 736 to 579. I mean, he was effectively not a major league hitter from the right side in 23. Yeah,
he's been more solid as a left-hander.
He's been So like, why try to upset the apple cart? I think I think the big thing for him, and I think the trap that I'm trying to avoid if I'm him, is thinking that my 2025 numbers weren't good enough, or there's like way more there, and
get the ball further out in front,
or try to hit more home runs. Like he's not the, he doesn't have the bat speed. He doesn't have the physical gifts, I guess, to just go out there and try to hit home runs. So I think if we're sitting here in January of 2027 and Perdomo hits, 290 again with 15 homers, I think that's a great year for somebody who plays shortstop. And I think that, I think the trap that he can fall into is like, okay, I hit 290 and 20 in 25. I'm going to hit 300 with 30 in 26. And we talked about Michael Harris halfway through the year last year as a guy who, there were some predictions that he was done, or that he was never going to be the player that he was before. And he had a bounce back second half because I think his intent changed completely. And I think that, if I were the Diamondbacks or I'm Perdomo, I don't want to fall into that same trap of thinking I need to do more than be even a 275 guy with 15 home runs, 15, 20 home runs as a shortstop.
Yeah, I mean, with the defense he plays, with the OBP that he runs, that's still a really good player. That makes him probably a 4 to 5 win player. You're very happy to have that and to be that, I think, on a year-over-year basis. So I get the sense just by the way you're talking about it and thinking about it from the fact that he really just maxed out playing time. He played all but one game last year, had 720 plate appearances, that we probably shouldn't pencil in another level of power. It's more like maybe he sustains this. He probably doesn't crater all the way back to a single-digit home run total, because this is a guy that I think maybe we underestimated how good his play discipline was prior to last season. Yep. Because he wasn't doing damage. I think it's easy to do that for guys that don't hit the ball hard. And every once in a while, you find that adjustment. The other thing that he was doing really well last year, when he hits fly balls, he pulls them. Like, he does a good job of hitting pulled fly balls, which for his skill set, if you're going to hit a fly ball, you should pull it.
Well, and I think that's learned, right? The old adage of like, you learn how to hit first and the power develops, right? Like this is what that looks like. And is he going to be a 20 home run guy every single year? Like, I probably wouldn't put money on that, but this is a very, very professional, performer who commands the strike zone, who's going to give you a professional at bat and has figured out or has made the adjustment, at least did last year, to put himself in a position to be efficient, to get his A swing off more often. Because if you're a player that makes decisions as well as he does at the plate, and you can get your A swing off consistently, you're gonna have yours like he did in 25.
Yeah, for those sort of wanting to put an analytical bow on it in terms of who, what should we do with him this year? And I think it's fair to maybe shop the projection systems and let's say you just take the rosiest projection, which is for a 270 average, 15 homers. There's the BATX, which cares about barrel rate a lot, wants 11 homers for him. So you're taking the 15 homers, 94 runs, 70 RBI, 25 steals. That's the rosiest projection. If you put that into a calculator, you get the kind of top 10 shortstop. He's kind of going in the right place maybe in drafts, but you also notice maybe that he should go against somebody ahead of somebody like CJ Abrams if you use that projection. And CJ Abrams goes 30 picks before him. In that he's basically equivalent to Jeremy Pena and not that far off of Mookie Betts. So, I mean, that's a great place to be. And if he's dropping in your draft and you're in the 90s or the hundreds and he's still there, he becomes a value pick if you believe those projections. And I think it also says something about what kind of players could you look for to do something like this? In the future, other players like this. I mean, what would you look for? I think maybe a decent controlling the zone, like somebody that walks above average and also strikes out less than average and hasn't really shown the power yet, but is young. Is that like a fair sort of way to look for breakouts like this? If we do something like that, Caleb Durbin shows up on a list, Jacob Wilson, could there be a power growth from him? Jung-Hoo Lee is still young enough actually to show up on this list. I did 27 and under with above average walks and better than average walks and strikeouts. Maikel Garcia, I mean, we saw a little bit of that growth. Could there be a little bit more? Sal Frelick is a guy that shows up here. Chase Mydroth. So it's interesting to think that here are some young players that we think we know, like Dalen Lyle. We think we know what they are, and that they're just okay players like a Perdomo, but they share some characteristics with a young Geraldo Perdomo.
Before Jed jumps in, I tried this exercise last year and I landed on Brian Rocchio And the misstep, hey, look, I'm admitting it. I'm coming right out saying I tried to follow the trail of M&Ms, and it didn't lead me anywhere good. The main reason I think is like you start to lose playing time when you're a well below average offensive player, which Rocchio was in 2024, despite having good plate skills, 20% K rate, 10% walk rate, a little bit of power, a little bit of speed. Like, he ticked plenty of boxes, and I thought his defense would be good enough to just carry his playing time. But I think there is a threshold of basic offensive value that you need to have before you actually throw the dart, hoping to hit
Joey
the
Ortiz,
next Perdomo, if there is one.
Joey Ortiz is on this list too, but he had a 66 WRC plus last year. So, you could do you could take this group and then sort it again for just what was their WRC plus, in that year. And then things come into better. I mean, then it looks like Aranda maybe. Dalen Lyle, is okay. He's kind of on the borderline there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Rocchio. Like, if you're gonna look for a guy who is gonna break out in a power category, who doesn't have the bat speed, I need his decision making to be elite. And I look at Rocchio. I see your point of like, it checks a couple boxes, but even in 24, your 40th percentile chase rate, 52nd whiff percent, 58th K percentage, even the walk rate is 73rd. Like, he doesn't do any of that elite, right? And I look at Perdomo, he's in the 90th percentile for every single one of those, 96, 98, 95, 93. And so I just, the decision making has to be to me, that's where the differentiation happens between somebody like a Perdomo and a Rocchio. And I look at like a Chase Mydroth, for example, 84th percentile for Chase, 96 whiff, 88 K, 58 walk. I think I like that profile in terms of a potential breakout more. Is he ready to do that, in his 25-year-old season? I'm not sure if there's enough at bats yet.
Because Perdomo took a couple years too, so it could be Chase Mydroth in 2 years. I mean, the other thing about Mydroth is he's really passive in the zone. It's like a 50% zone swing, which is really passive. Dalen Lyle is above average in the zone and above average out of the zone. And I poo-pooed him because the bat speed metrics are not there for him, but there's some similarity here. He had a better season than you might have expected already, so he's already on sleeper lists. But it's something to think about. And then you name
some Jacob Wilson, right? Like, chase percentage, he chases a lot, but 99th percentile for whiff, 100% for K. The walk percentage is a little low. He benefits from playing in Sacramento, quite frankly. I mean, that is just a hitter's dream. But here's a guy that has a high contact rate. And so, I get a little worried about the chase and walk percentage on there, being as low as they are, but the whiff and the K percentage are elite.
And one thing that Wilson does that Perdomo did was he plays that defensive position. So we're talking about, some of these externalities, which is, how good are your decisions at the plate and how good is your defense going to be? Dalen Lyle is a bad defender. And he's a bad defender in a corner outfield. So that's an externality that doesn't speak in his favor.
I'm still on the side that thinks it's impossible to remain this bad defensively as a team as it pertains to the Nationals. But if you're wondering why I sometimes roll my eyes at bat speeds, because I think I don't want to put too much weight in any one part of hitting that we're learning about, right? I feel like we get a little overweight sometimes on bat speed, but that is a conversation for another day. We are going to go. A reminder, you can join our Discord with the link in the show description. We're going to get back to our position preview series for our next 2 episodes coming out this week. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.